Здравствуйте, можно сразу спросить, а будет ли смотр контрольных работ?
Вас
У вас
не слышно, да.
микрофон выключен.
Все в индивидуальном порядке. Пишите мне email. Здравствуйте. Слышно было меня, нет?
Да.
Угу. As you might suspect, today is the last lecture. So we're almost done with the material of the course. So, and the final exam is already next week. So we are going to be done before the exam week. So which is, I think, good for you. You'll have time to prepare. Rather than during the exam week, there is like every week, every day there is an exam, so I don't even know how you can manage that.
So next Friday, on
Yes.
our usual schedule, we'll have not a lecture but a final exam. So for
Yes,
one,
it's already in schedule. Yes, so you can find it
okay.
in your schedule, and it's yes, it's instead of the lecture, but it will be it will start early at not at 9:30 but at 9 because we need more time for the exam. All other instruction with regard to the exam are the same as with respect to the midterm, right? So it will be in Smart LMS. We will have asynchronous proctoring. The material that is going to be on exam is last 4 lectures. It is what we studied, what was not covered during the midterm. Okay.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So topics of lectures from 1 to 3rd won't happen.
Yes.
In exam. Okay, I see. Thank you.
And yes, about the homework, you will have one more homework. It's the last homework, and it will be due to the exam. It's based on the today's lecture. So you will have 1 week, and then you will have submitted next Friday. Okay. Let's then start today's lecture. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit sick, so you might hear this in my voice, but that is as it is. Okay, today we are going to talk about tax evasion. So, what is it and why are we going to study it? So far we assume that both firms and consumers, they honestly behave when they were calculated and paying their taxes. However, people explore various margins to minimize their taxes. So here I will give you some interesting examples because tax cheating is as old as as our word. So during the 3rd century, many wealthy Romans buried their jewelry or stock of gold coin to evade the luxury tax. This is from Roman Empire, and the other example is about 18th century England. Homeowners there temporarily bricked up their fireplaces to escape notice of the fireplace tax collector. Right, you see there was different taxes and different ways how people try to not to pay those taxes. In practice, people and economists distinguish between two notions of cheating, and they are called evasion and avoidance. Evasion is illegal means of reducing tax liability, and avoidance is legal means to reduce tax liabilities. Right? You kind of do this legally, but you explore various margin of tax codes to minimize your tax obligations. So, as I already said, and you might suspect, in practice, tax evasion is pervasive in many economies. And in the United States, they in 1978 started this thing. They periodically estimate the tax gap to estimate how much of tax should be paid but is not paid voluntarily in a timely way. And in 2006, overall gross tax gap was 450 billion, which is approximately 17% of estimated actual tax liability. So here I will provide you a table for 2006. It is billions of dollars for United States. The estimated tax liability was 2,660 billion, and the tax gap was 450, right? And the tax gap sum up from different non-honest behavior. One of them is non-filing. I will explain it. The other is underpayment, and the third one is underreporting. So non-filing. In United States, every person has to file their tax obligation. This is different from Russian settings, because here in Russia, if you have only wage income tax, then you don't need to file your income tax. For example, I don't file my income tax because I only receive wage income from the HSE. In the United States, if I would be hired by university, I will still need to file my taxes, even if I just only have wage income tax, right? And non-filing means that some people just fail to do that, right? Fail to file their taxes, to say to the government what is their tax obligation, what is their tax liability are, right? Then underpayment category here means that there are people who did file their taxes and correctly wrote their tax liabilities, but they just didn't pay the full amount. And then the third category here, underreporting, means that they did, people did file their tax obligation and they pay what they say, but they actually said false information, right? They didn't say the whole amount of their tax obligation. And underreporting can be about different taxes. And you see here the table breaks this underreporting gap into individual income, which exclude non-business income, and different sorts of business income. Then also corporate income tax, employment tax, estate tax, and then provide the numbers of how large each of these category. But you see that like how the total tax gap accumulates from different aspects of taxpayer cheating behavior. Okay, so
Excuse me.
in today, yes.
I have one question. So practically, how was that data collected? Can we observe it?
You cannot observe, right? Let me see. There are so first you like the people file their tax report. If they underreport, they underreport them. But then the government, as you will see lecture from our lecture later from our lecture, the government usually provide investigation of the taxpayers report, which called audit, right? The government, actually the tax authority, conduct tax audits. And they can check, right, the different sources, right, and verify your report, and then kind of discover that some people underreport their tax obligations. And in order to collect that data, I believe that the IRS, which is International Revenue Services in the United States, that is the tax authority there, they put special efforts. There was a special program, so they would put in special money and conducted additional enforcement exercises in order to kind of collect those data. So it was like more than usual efforts to investigate taxpayers' reports. Okay, I answered your question. So then in today's lecture, we're going to discuss first the model of tax evasion, which is analyzes the taxpayer's decision to evade and the factors involved in this decision, right? So we will start from consumers, which is taxpayers, and then we will move on to the tax authority enforcement problem. So we will discuss what the incentive and what the instrument the tax authority has in order to combat tax evasion. Right? So as usual, we are interested in the tax authority behavior and the optimally decision, but today we will only be able to touch that issue just a little. So let us start from taxpayer evasion model. So we will consider, actually this is a very, very famous, let me explain this a little bit more, a very, very famous paper by Ellingham and Salma. So if you ever would do research on tax evasion, and I'm doing the research in this area, almost every paper cites this the current paper cites this old Ellingham Salma paper, and it's like kind of a very background model that people in this area should know. So let us consider a risk-averse consumer, which means that he has a utility function that is concave. He has to pay income tax at a constant tax rate T. Taxpayer's true income is Y. And what is important that the tax authority does not know the true income, right? Then the taxpayer chooses how much of income to report to the tax authority, and this reported income is denoted by X, and then the corresponding tax is equal to TX, right? So the taxpayer has some income, some true income Y, and then he decides how much to report, X, and then pay the tax based on this TX. The tax authority then audits the taxpayer with probability P. Right? So let us start to write down the taxpayer's income based on the different cases. So if taxpayer evades without being caught, then his income is Y with a super index NC, meaning non-caught. Y non-caught is equal to little y minus TX, right? Because he's true income Y and he reports X, and the only tax he pays is TX, right? We can rewrite this a little bit differently as 1 minus TY. This is what would be his after-tax income if he would report honestly, plus T multiply the difference between Y and X, which is what he managed to kind of save due to his cheating. Okay, then the next case, if the taxpayer is audited and caught, then all income is taxed and a fine at rate F is valid on evaded tax. So here the income in this case is denoted by a capital YC, right, meaning caught, Y caught, and it is equal to 1 minus TY minus fine rate F multiply tax rate T, multiply the difference between Y and X, right? So again, here it's what the taxpayer would pay if he would behave honestly, which is 1 minus TY, minus the fine, right, that he pays because of his non-honest behavior. So here the fine is proportional to evaded tax. In the original Ellingham-Summer model, the fine was proportional to evaded income, right? The difference is technically very slight. So it's in the original Ellingham-Summer model is F multiply Y minus X without T. But then the later research kind of corrected that, because in most of the country, I think actually in all of the countries, the fine is imposed based on evaded tax. And that correction was made by Yudzaki, and therefore we called the model we consider Ellingham-Summer Yudzaki. Right? So it's also would affect some implication from the model, but just know that it's due to the Yudzaki. So a taxpayer then chooses reported income X to maximize expected utility, which is equal to 1 minus P, the probability that taxpayer is not audited, multiply so multiply the utility of Y non-caught plus multiply probability P plus probability P, which is the case that taxpayer is audited, multiply the utility of Y code. Alternatively, we can maximize this expected utility not with respect to reported income, but with respect to evasion. And evasion is simply equal to the difference between the true income Y and the reported income X. Right? So while the problem looks like a little bit unfamiliar to you, we can actually graphically illustrate it in a way that is very similar to what you did in your introductory microeconomic course. So finding the point where the indifference curve touches to the budget constraint. Let us understand how we can come to that simple graphical solution. So this expected utility of income, so we can treat it as just a utility of an individual that depend on two goods, Y and C and YC, and then just write in a difference curve. And with respect to the budget constraint, we can combine. So we can combine equation 1 and equation 2, right? For example, we can derive x from the first equation and plug in back into the second equation, and then find how y c and y non c related to each other, right? And then try a budget line. You see that it's not exactly the same as in your standard microeconomic model, because the budget constraint, right, looks it's a little bit cut off, right? But the basic idea is still the same. There is some difference if we consider the corner solutions that are illustrated on these graphs. Right, you see this left-hand side graph illustrate as the case where it's optimal to report x equal to y, meaning that to report your income honestly, right? So your report is income to your true income. And in that case, right, we see that indifference curve touches the budget line at the point that lies on the 45 on the diagonal, right, on the 45-degree line.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please repeat? So X is our reported income and Y is our real income, right?
Yes, right.
Okay.
The true income, the real income. Yes, and instead of a graphical approach, you can simply do the math and derive the first order condition. Here we have it for first for an interior solution, right? The interior solution is characterized by the following fork. So here we take the derivative with respect to evasion E. So, and the first order condition would be 1 minus P multiply tax rate T, multiply the derivative of U evaluated at Y and C, minus probability P, multiply the fine rate F, multiply the tax rate T, multiply the derivative of U evaluated at YC, and this all equal to 0. This first order condition determines the optimal evasion. Right, and here we have an expression for what is YC, Y non C and YC in terms of evasion, right? You can see it. So it's not that difficult, right? Just I would say just simple. It's also useful to discuss the first order condition for the corner solution. So the corner solution when people choose not to evade, which is E star equal to 0. So note that in this case, Y non C and YC equal to, they are equal, and they are equal to Y minus TY. So then the first order condition would be basically as the previous one, but it should be less or equal than 0, right? So it should be that expected marginal utility at the corner solution is non-positive or basic kind of negative, right? It should be less or equal than 0. So let me read it. 1 minus pt multiplied the derivative of u evaluated at 1 minus ty minus p ft multiplied the derivative of u evaluated at the point 1 minus ty, and all this should be less or equal than 0. So because, right, the derivative of utility is what is positive, right? We deal with the concave utility function. Then we can just omit, right, this derivative of utility, and rewrite our inequality as 1 minus pt minus pft less or equal than 0. And again, we can cancel out t and write this inequality as p greater or equal than 1 divided by 1 plus f.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I have a question about the interpretation. So we have some interior solutions, and we should have two corner solutions.
Yeah.
No? Only one corner solution?
No. We have two corner solution, as you could remember the graphs.
Yes.
But here we discuss only the first one, right? The left-hand side graph. You can similar derive some corner solution for the second case, but this one has an interesting implication or meaning. So we are almost ready to discuss it. So you see that the condition we derived mean that we have a corner solution E equal to 0 if P is greater or equal than 1 divided by 1 plus F, which means that a taxpayer evades when audit probability is sufficiently small, and specifically F is less than 1 divided by 1 plus F. So we see that it's depend just on these two parameters: probability of audit, the decision to evade or not, right? Not how much to evade, but just to evade or not. In this case, depend on just the two parameters: probability of an audit and the fine rate. It does not depend directly on the income, true income of an individual. The amount of evasion would, if you choose to evade, it would depend, but whether taxpayers evade or not doesn't depend on their income, which is interesting, right? Which is an interesting implication of this model. So let us now discuss some comparative statics. So specifically, let us analyze the effect of a change in a model's parameter on a tax evasion. The parameters of interest are audit probability, the fine rate, the income level, and the tax rate. So let us first consider an increase in audit probability P. And such an increase, right, an increase in audit probability make the difference curve flatter where they cross the 45-degree line. So here is the illustration what happens. And change in audit probability does not change the budget line. Again, to kind of see that, we need to go back to the very first slide with the settings of the model. You see that neither equation 1 nor equation 2 depend on the audit probability, right? So this means that eventually the budget line would not depend on audit probability. And to understand how the indifference curve effect on the probability of audit P, right, you need to do the following exercise. You need to equate this expected utility to a constant, and then to understand what would happen, right, how it would react if audit probability P increases. And so yes, an increase in an audit probability make is flatter. And as a result, you can see from this illustration that an increase in an audit probability would increase, right? So we would move closer to the diagonal, and moving closer to the diagonal meaning reducing evasion, right? So the people would in both states of the world, right, YC and Y non-C, they would be more identical to more similar to each other, meaning that the evasion is low. Okay. As usual, an alternative to a graphical solution is just an analytical solution. We can derive an expression how the optimal evasion depends on the audit probability. So I will read you the expression, and the derivation, a way how to derive a similar stuff would be discussed at the seminar. I hope you would have enough time there. So the derivative of E star with respect to P is equal to 1, is equal to minus 1 divided by D. D is a notation. Multiply the bracket, which includes T, the derivative of Y and C, plus F T, the derivative of Y C, and because D is positive and two terms in the bracket they positive, and we have minus in front of all of this. This derivative is negative, which again tells us that an increase in the audit probability reduces evasion. And D, here you can see it's minus T squared 1 minus P second derivative of U evaluated at Y and C plus F squared T squared P, the second derivative of U, Y C. And this is nothing else but the second order condition, right? We didn't talk much about that, but I would just mention that D is equal to negative second order condition. And because we deal with the concave utility function, that D is positive.
So for concave utility function, the second derivative is positive.
It's negative.
Is negative.
Negative.
Okay.
So you just remember the shape.
Yeah. Yes.
Of the concave utility function. It looks like a square function or logarithm.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have a positive slope but negative second derivative.
So how do we make that conclusion that D? I see.
You see minus.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So we also can analyze an increase in the penalty. Before I move there, let me just mention that the effect of audit probability on evasion is very intuitive, right? So what would we expect would happen if we increase audit probability? We would expect that people would start evade less. Right? We would expect that the audit probability we would expect that evasion would decrease, right? So this is a kind of very intuitive result. The effect of an increase in the fine rate or in the penalty on the evasion is also very intuitive, and it will cause a decrease in evasion. So we can, in a similar way, calculate the derivative of E star with respect to fine rate F and see that it's negative, which would just again will be a confirmation of our intuition about this effect. So we are also interested in the effect of an increase in income. An increase in income graphically would mean the following. It would mean a parallel shift in the budget line. You can check it, right? And there will be no change in the indifference curve. And from that, we are unsure about the effect of an increase on the evasion or on the reported income, right? It can be either direction. And actually it appears that the effect of an increase in the true income on tax evasion depends on the behavior of absolute risk aversion measure. Let us recall what is it, right? So this measure, absolute risk aversion measure, we will denote it by R with low index A. It depends on true income Y. And it's equal to minus the ratio of the second derivative of utility to the first derivative of utility, right? I do hope that you discuss this at your microeconomic course. If not, then just learn this from this slide. So this absolute risk aversion measures the attitude of the people toward risk, and in practice it decreases as income increases, meaning that wealthy individuals are more willing to engage in smaller gamble. Right, so a decrease in the this measure with income represent that people become less risk averse as income increases, meaning that wealthy individuals are more willing to engage in a small gamble. And if it's so, then an increase in the income level leads to an increase in evasion in our model, as long as absolute risk aversion is decreasing. Okay, so if we presume that wealthy individuals they become in some sense less risk averse, right? Then which happens if the absolute risk aversion is decreasing, then an increase in the true income would lead to an increase in evasion. Okay. Now consider an increase in the tax rate. Then, because it's produced only income effect in our model, and it's know that it's only in the Yuzaki formulation of imposition of a fine rate on the evaded tax. Then, right, because the tax rate in these settings would produce on the income effect, that it would again depend on the absolute risk aversion measure. And if at low income people gamble less, right, meaning that absolute risk aversion is decreasing, then an increase in tax rate reduces evasion, right? Because an increase in a tax rate would everyone else fixed make people relatively poor, right? And due to that income effect, people would reduce the evasion.
Excuse me.
Yes?
I've got a question. So finally, who prefer less gamble, more wealthy people or lower income? I'm confused.
You mean like in practice?
So this model doesn't really correspond to practical cases in that aspect.
No, there could be a lot of things happening in practice, but on average, right, the economists believe that wealthier people engage more in risk, meaning that average risk aversion measure is decreasing. So you can meet some crazy poor individuals that gamble a lot. but this is probably not an average representative individual. If we would kind of measure the risky behavior on average, right, that it's indeed the economists believe that wealthier people more risky, meaning that average risk aversion is decreasing.
Okay, thank you.
And under this assumption, right, we see that an increase in income increases evasion, and increase in tax rate reduces evasion. But let us discuss this last effect, right? So how you would suspect, what would you expect in practice? What would be the effect of increase in tax rate? Right, if you like imagine yourself in like 5 years after graduating the HSC, and you live in a time of a tax reform that increases personal income tax rate. So what would you be intuitive
So we will try.
prediction about the effect of a tax rate? Yes, please.
We will try to evade it more.
So you would, yes. So the intuitive view is think something opposite that we kind of see from this model, right? So because the model predicts less evasion. And the public economist that studied that aspect, they tried to measure from the data the effect of an increase in the tax rate on the taxpayer evasion behavior, and there is a very mixed findings. There are very mixed findings because some paper they indeed confirm our conclusion from this model, and other findings they indeed find what the Nikolai's just said to us, right? That we expect that in practice an increase in tax rate increase evasion. And this is one explanation to this is that this model, right, it's only accounts for the what aspects? Let me move to the next slide because because this model is sometimes called the deterrence model, and it's only count a small set of factors that matter. Right? It's like you are in evasion. It's like a gamble. Right? It's matter the probability of being caught and penalty for evasion. Right? And your risk aversion. So you are very pragmatic in this sense, right? And in practice, you probably feel unfair, right? So it's like, you see an increase in the tax rate, and like, come on, right? So why that's happened, right? So it's like the reaction. The people behavior is more complex than what we describe in this model, right? It's kind of feeling of unfairness, right, of the government behavior, or something like that, right? Or maybe something else, but not those factors that play a role in this model, right? But if people would reason just like those economic agents in the summer model, then they probably would react that way. One important note is that a taxpayer who evades taxes, right, he increases both his exposure to risk and his expected income. It's something that usually left behind that model, right? So it's just like seems like people cheating and it's just a choice, but not quite that, because this additional exposure to risk is a dead weight loss to society. In principle, the taxpayer could be better off under an agreement where the taxpayer pays at least as much as the government currently collects, while the government ceases to audit, right? This would never happen in practice, but we can imagine this as a theoretical experiment, and this would be a product improvement, right? And this additional risk-bearing cost incurred by taxpayer needs to be taken into account when measuring the deadweight cost of taxation, right? This is something that needs to be remembered by our economists. So I already kind of started to talk about this slide. So we learned this very famous Ellingham-Summer model that sometimes is called deterrence model. It depends on small set of factors. It's very useful model, right? It's simple and provides a lot of predictions, a lot of intuitive predictions. But as any model, it has some drawbacks, right? And one of them is that if one taxpayer chooses to evade, then all taxpayers should evade, right? This is the implication from the corner solution we just discussed earlier. And the other is that given the parameters values, the model predicts more evasion that we would observe in practice, right? This is an exercise that some economists did, so we can estimate the values of parameters of the model from practice from an economy. So, for example, in Russia, what is the tax penalty rate? I don't know exactly, but like 20%, right? Something like that. Then audit probability. Audit probability is usually quite low, just about 1-5%, no more than that. Then we know the distribution of income in the population, so we can calculate approximately the aggregate evasion. And as I already said, the model predicts more evasion that we observe in practice. And this means that something else also matters when people make their decision about tax evasion. And specifically, what's matter is that people care about illegality of actions. And in Ellingham-Summer deterrence model, assume that nothing about the legality of actions matter, and that everybody acts as a free rider so that there is no issues of intrinsic willingness to pay or tax morale. And some surveys or experimental studies show that the attitude and social norms affect the extent of tax evasion. In addition to that, people feeling guilt or social stigma when evading taxes, right, this also matters. And also some study argues that taxpayers' behavior depends on the behavior and intention of the government, right? Because like there is a difference in developing and development country, the attitude toward government differ, not too much, because you can never trust too much to the government, but nevertheless. And so these aspects matter, and try to give a flavor. It's not a complete model, but just to give you a flavor how we can incorporate these honesty aspects or social norm aspects into the model. We will consider this simple extension of the model we just learned. So specifically, taxpayer evading taxes will feel a varying degree of anxiety and regret. For some people, evasion is a traumatic experience or a damage to their self-image, and for others, it's only a slight inconvenience. A preference for honesty is introduced in utility function as described by this equation 11. So it's what the utility we just had, u of I minus CE. Correct me if I'm wrong with this Greek letter, but it's looks like a C. And this would represent the utility cost of deviating from complete honesty. And taxpayer evades if the utility gain of evasion exceeds the utility reduction or the utility cost, which is CE.
Can you please repeat in what cases does the individual evade paying taxes? So when
Yeah, you just can calculate the expected utility from evasion.
okay,
Right, like we did in the previous model. And then compare this utility with the utility cost, which in this set it's introduced as just a parameter here, multiply E. E is just evasion level you choose.
okay, I got it.
Could you please check how do we read this letter, Greek letter, he or C? I'm really sorry, just like he. Okay, thank you guys. So the taxpayer differ in their value of he. And so the population is separated, is going to be separated into two parts depending on this parameter here. So first will be taxpayer choosing not to evade, and this will be those for whom he is greater or equal than some threshold value he had. And the other group is those who choose to wait, and this is with low value of here, right? And what is interesting is that a change in one of the parameter of the model that we just discussed, right, has now two effects. First effect is on individual evasion level, E star, which is we just discussed. And the other is on aggregate evasion. And this occurred by change in this threshold he had. Oh, sorry, guys. Something going on with my memory today. So, for example, an increase in the tax rate T would lead now to two effects. First, a reduction in evasion level for those who evade. This is exactly what we just discussed. But then will be additional second effect in rises the value of he had and hence increases the number of evaders. Right? And as a result, an increase in the tax rate might lead to a more evasion in aggregate. Right? So each person would reduce a little bit more, but there will be more people who choose to evade, right? If we calculate the aggregate evasion in those settings, then aggregate evasion might potentially increase, right? And this model would provide us just like a way to reconcile the enhanced sum with our practical observation potential, right? So the exact mathematical solution of this model is that not that simple, right? But the intuitive story, right, about this extended model is quite nice, right? So we see that there is like just these two effects that play a role. Okay, so in the previous models that we analyzed, only taxpayer's choice on evasion was considered, and the audit probability and the fine rate were fixed. Right. We'll now consider the government decision problem, and for government perspective, the audit probability and the fine rate, they are variables of choice. And it can use this instrument to reduce tax evasion in order to collect the required tax revenue. For example, the probability of audit can be raised by an employment of additional tax auditors, and the fine can be legislated or set by the court, right? So we are now going to move to the government decision problem, and we'll start to play with the audit probability and the fine rate, because this actually instrument for the tax authority. If we now will try to analyze the effect of an increase in P&F on the tax revenue, and first we will calculate the tax revenue denoted here by R, so it's just simply TX, right? The tax revenue that government collect before audit, and then if it's conduct audit, it collect additional tax revenue P plus 1 plus F multiply T multiply the difference between 1 and X. And if you simply take the derivatives of this tax revenue with respect to P and tax revenue with respect to F, you will see that those derivatives are positive, meaning that they indeed, those instruments, right, are indeed helpful to increase revenue. Okay, then we just need to use it, but they are costly, right? So there are costs of using those instruments. Specifically two instrument, audit probability and fine, could help government to raise tax revenue, but an increase in audit probability is costly. You might think that an increase in the fine rate might seem to be relatively cheaper, right? So usually we used in microeconomics just to change the fine rate back and forth. But in practice, the tax authority cannot really control the fine rate because with regard to tax policy, the responsibilities assignment are the following. The central government is usually in charge of setting the tax rate. The audit probability is controlled by the tax authority. It seems to be the only instrument under the control of the tax authority because the punishment is set by the justice agency or the central government. And so what is our conclusion? It seems that the only instrument among those two instruments we consider now under the control of the tax authority or the revenue service is audit probability, and it's costly. So how would then the tax authority choose its audit probability? What is optimal level? So in order to kind of get some idea behind those tax authority decisions, let us consider a very, very simple model which is called tax compliance game. In this model, we will consider an interaction between the tax authority and the taxpayer. The taxpayer with true income Y would be either be able to evade or not, right? Just a binary decision, evade or not. If he reports truthfully, he has to pay tax T. And the tax authority in this model can either audit the income report or not. An audit is costly, and the cost of an audit is C. So if the taxpayer is caught evading, he pays the tax T plus a fine F, and we will assume that cost C is less than tax. Here is a table that illustrates the strategies of taxpayer and of the revenue service of the tax authority and their payoffs. Right. So, so the question to you was, what would be the Nash equilibrium here in the pure strategies? The answer to this question you can read in my next slide is that there is no pure strategy equilibrium in this model. Why? Because if a taxpayer would choose to evade, then the tax authority would prefer to audit. But if the tax authority prefer to audit, then the taxpayer would instead choose to not evade. If the taxpayer choose not to evade, then the tax authority would prefer not to audit, and you actually can do this more rigorously and kind of check that there's no pure strategy equilibrium in this case. Okay. Right? Remember, you did this lowercase lines on the each payoffs and see. You remember. Okay. Yes. What is the question?
Could you please remind us what is F and C? So F, it's payment. Yes, it's a fine. And C?
It's a cost to the tax authority.
To audit. Okay.
Yes, an audit is costly, and this is the cost of an audit.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so then we are interested in calculating the mixed strategy equilibrium. To do that, let us denote it by epsilon, the probability that taxpayer evades, and by p, the probability of an audit. Then in the mixed strategy equilibrium, player must be indifferent between their two pure strategies. Specifically, for the taxpayer, he needs to be indifferent between not evading and evading. If taxpayer choose not to evade, no matter what the tax authority does, his income is YT, right? So this means that this y minus t should be equal to the payoff from evading. The payoff from evading depends on what government does. So with probability 1 minus p, the government choose not to audit, and then the taxpayer's payoff is y. So this meaning 1 minus py plus with probability p, the government choose audit, and then the taxpayer's payoff is y minus t minus f. So from that we can calculate the equilibrium probability of an audit, and it's equal to t divided by t plus f. Right? So then we need to do a similar stuff for the tax authority. So the tax authority needs to be indifferent between auditing and not auditing, right? So if the tax authority chooses to audit, then his payoff depends on what the tax authority does. If with probability epsilon, the tax authority evades, and the taxpayer's payoff is t plus f minus c, plus with probability 1 minus epsilon, the taxpayer does not evade, then the payoff of the tax authority is t minus c. And this should be equal to the payoff of the tax authority from not auditing. Right? If the taxpayer choose not to audit, then he receives payoff only if the taxpayer choose not to evade, which is happens with probability 1 minus epsilon, and the payoff of the tax authority is t. From that equation, we can calculate now the equilibrium probability that the taxpayer evades, epsilon star, and it's equal to c divided by t plus f. So here is a mixed strategy equilibrium, right, which is described by those equilibrium probabilities. We see that audit probability P star declines with a fine and rises with a tax, right? The evasion probability E star declines with the fine and the tax, and rises with the cost of an audit, which makes sense. So if we can now calculate the equilibrium payoff for the taxpayer, it's equal to y minus t, because he's indifferent between evading and not, right? So, and the equilibrium proof of the tax authority is equal to T minus C divided by T plus F minus T. So, two interesting observations from that. First, we can note that increasing the fine is Pareto improving in this model. It raises the tax revenue but does not affect the taxpayer. Right? And then the second observation is that the equilibrium pre-also reflects that deadweight loss from evasion is C divided by T plus F multiply T. You see that it's kind of like taxpayer pays T, but the tax authority receives less than T. Right? There is like this deadweight loss that arises from evasion. So this certainly a simplification, right, of what actually happens in reality, but it's an illustration of what factors matter for the government when it chooses its optimal strategy of how to audit. We have discussed two enforcement instruments, which is audit rates and penalties, in the above model. And in practice, there is actually other instrument that the tax authority has, right, to deal with tax evasion. And one important instrument is called reporting requirements. We're going to talk about this. One reporting requirement is withholding. What is withholding? Withholding refers to the situation where some or all of a tax liability must be remitted by someone other than the tax authority. For example, employee wage tax withholding by employer. For example, me, right? So I does not pay taxes myself. When I receive my wage, it's already after tax. How does it happen? Because in Russia we have wage income tax withholding, meaning that HSC calculate my tax and remit this tax to the tax authority, and I receive my wage income already after tax, right? So I does not pay, I kind of pay my taxes, right? But I does not do this myself technically, right? Because everything done by my employer, by HSC. And this is done for every large business or corporation that hire some employees. So in practice, withholding is usually restricted to businesses and government agencies, and it facilitates administration by allowing the tax authority to take advantage of economies of scale that exist in dealing with a smaller number of larger remitters, right? Who for other reasons have sophisticated record keeping and accounting system. What does it mean? So instead of dealing with a lot of employees, right, the tax authority now has to deal only with High School of Economics, right? It have thousands of employees, and alternatively, it could kind of directly deal with them to calculate their taxes, to conduct audits. But, right, so instead of that, because we have this withholding, the tax authority, they only deals with the this large business, right, this HSE, and investigates their reports, right? And because, right, the HSE does not directly have an incentive to evade on my, say, taxes. And in addition to that, it has a sophisticated record keeping for its own purposes, right? Because it would not kind of have that it would not be able to just like basically exist, right? Because it has to track everything. So the government, the tax authority, just taken advantages of that. So remitters usually have less incentive to evade taxes than they remit. This is already mentioned to you. Some illustration of this in word settings. So the introduction of income tax withholding in the United States during the World War II helped facilitate the change of income tax from a class tax faced by only wealthy to a mass tax faced by the most Americans. These days, withholding for income tax is widespread. It's required for wages and salary in all but 2 of 30 OECD countries, and for interested income in 21 of OECD countries. Let me conclude our today lectures by the following. So, information is central to the operation of the tax enforcement system. One of the main reasons for the tax evasion is the asymmetric information between the tax authority and taxpayers. And to combat the tax evasion, the tax authority has to mitigate the asymmetry of information by means of auditing and selecting information reporting requirements. So we conclude by that information is critical as always, right? Everywhere in the economy, information is critical, and here it's critical even more than ever. Okay, guys. So thank you so much for attending the classes. I hope you learned something about tax system in general, about public economics. And again, so if you have any questions, write me an email. Okay, guys, thank you so much, and we are done.
Thank you. I have one question about our exam. So, will we be able to use our notes on the exam?
Notes? Yes, so I think I'm going to allow you to do that. You see, I'm constrained by the current situation, so as well as you, right, guys? So you're constrained and I'm constrained. You are writing exams online, and like, how can I prohibit you to use? It's better you will use your notes, guys, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.
Юлия Андреевна,
Yes.
можно обсудить контрольную, если у вас время есть сейчас?
Хорошо, давайте.
Я вот хотел бы узнать, как можно решить ситуацию, потому что я не очень понимаю, что мне делать. Я вот вам написал вчера.
Ну, я вам тоже написала, Карен, потому что я, как и вы, уверена, с большей уверенностью, чем вы. Да? Поэтому в данной ситуации, да, то есть я свое решение готова оспаривать. И
А я могу посмотреть хотя бы, что именно вызвало такие опасения, то, что одна и та же работа была, потому что я не видел работы моих товарищей, моих однокурсников. Может, там действительно что-то там, ошибку мы одну и ту же сделали или что-нибудь в
ну,
этом
на самом
роде?
деле, у вас ошибки нет. да, но работы ваших однокурсников, это вы выясните у них, как ваша работа, так сказать, переместилась к ним, я не знаю. Да, то есть вы говорите, что вот вы все записывали, но я просматривала ваше видео, рук у вас не видно, видно ваше лицо, поэтому как бы...
Ну, руки у меня были видны, когда я
Ну,
начинал
может быть, в
запись.
какой-то момент они и были видны. Зачем вы
В самом
используете
начале.
наушники, я не знаю. Да? Как бы это не разрешается. Работу вашу, то есть я могу показать вам, да, 3 работы.
Если можно, давайте посмотрим.
Ну, это как бы... Нет, я не могу вам показать, потому что... Ну, хотя нет, сейчас я подумаю. Они у меня на ноутбуке, я работаю сейчас с вами с компьютера. Так, единственное, что я могу зайти непосредственно на экзамен.
Извините, тогда можно
Да, да.
параллельно вопрос. Я просто тоже же пользуюсь наушниками, а вернее гарнитурой, потому что у меня вот хороший микрофон только на ней. Это же нормально или я просто иначе не услышу ничего? То есть если вы подключитесь к каналу, вот у меня, скажем,
Но
нет
я уже
колонок.
2 года наушниками пользуюсь во время экзаменов и с экзамусом, и без него. Я не знал то, что это может какую-то проблему вызвать.
Ну, у меня это явно вызывает подозрение. Да, то есть как бы я не слышу, что вам в эти наушники говорится.
Так я же сам с собой разговаривал во время экзамена, если вы смотрели.
Да,
Я
я
вот-
вот сама с собой не разговариваю, поэтому у меня это тоже как бы кажется несколько странным. Ну
Ну,
ладно. Да.
это уже, это просто я не знаю, как мне, ну, что мне с этим делать, потому что
Вот,
подозрение
например,
может
да,
вызвать
возьмем
вообще все, что угодно.
решение Николая и решение ваше. Ваше, вот вы мне говорите, да, ваша защита, что все решения одинаковые. Абсолютно неверно. Я была поражена, насколько разные решения, вот 40 человек, которые писали, да, то есть вот у Николая решение как отбойный молоток. Можно любую задачу брать, я такого решения еще никогда не видела, да, то есть я, например, была восхищена. Но там допущено несколько арифметических ошибок. Да? Соответственно, если у Николая вопрос, почему, за что я сняла, за арифметические ошибки, ответ неверный. У вас, Карен, решение классическое. Вот, да, вот в классическом виде, как мы решали на семинаре. Ошибок нет, решение правильное. Но у ваших товарищей решение точно такое же. При этом я сравнивала, то есть решение ну вот, вы не один человек был на подозрении, да, но тем не менее решение, видна логика. Вот выразить а плюс b равно x можно переписать очень по-разному, да, тем более, что там у нас 5 уравнений, решить одно из другого можно по-разному. Человек точности в то решает, потом он, видимо, пытался решать сам, потом уравнение не вытекает, вот уравнение, которое получено из предыдущих уравнений, оно никак не может получиться. Оно просто списано, в какой-то момент, я не знаю, пришла новая информация, оно списано, поставлено и дает полученные ответы.
Ну, просто
есть...
вы сами видите то, что я должен сейчас слушать о том, какие работы у других. Я же не могу никак с этим на это отвечать, потому что я не видел эти работы, я ничего не знаю.
Нет. Без вашей помощи эти работы просочиться к ним никак не могли.
Так а как я помогал бы, если у нас даже в разном порядке эти задания? Если я
Вот
на
я не
запись
знаю,
пишу...
ваши друзья почему-то первую задачу решают там, я не знаю, по полчаса, чего-то ждут, да, а потом вдруг раз и быстренько все решают. Как? Я не знаю.
Я просто не знаю, почему я должен страдать от ситуации, когда подозрения вызывают чужие работы.
Подозрение вызывает ваша работа, потому что чужие работы списаны с вашей работы. Вот, да?
Ну, так может наоборот, я списал с
Не
других
давайте
работ.
списывать. Я училась в университете Мичиган. Там за списывание выгоняли сразу. Там студенты дрожали. То есть вот списал, все, больше не учишься. У вас здесь такой расслабон, что начинается вот это. Почему я должна тратить свое время на вот это вот? Я кучу времени убила на проверку мидтерма.
Так я не давал никому списывать. Вы это повторяете несколько раз, но у меня же другая позиция. Я могу доказать то, что если работы одинаковые, это может быть вызвано другим. Давайте мы вместе посмотрим эти работы. Но даже если домашние задания смотреть, я уверен, что в домашних работах у большей части людей практически одинаковые решения.
У вас есть такой нюанс. Сейчас вот я вам хорошо покажу. Абсолютно уникальный. Я не знаю, почему вы так написали, но... Так. Не имеет никакого отношения к решению. Чисто случайность.
Я тогда, наверное, уже поблагодарю за курс и пойду там уже с следующей пары.
Да, вы спокойно можете идти, то есть я никого не держу.
Спасибо, до свидания.
До свидания.
Да-да, и еще раз все-таки про гарнитуру, то есть это вызывает подозрение, но как бы если это единственное подозрение, то все нормально.
Ну, как бы, если
Или
нет
лучше снять.
Подозрений к работе, да, то, в принципе, претензий к этому нет. Но когда есть огромные подозрения к работе, то наличие гарнитуры только усложняет эту ситуацию.
Понял, хорошо. Спасибо, до свидания.